circadian rhythms. Yeah. Yeah. I have 5 clocks in my house that I have to wind, and there are 4 others that need to be adjusted digitally, and I did that all last night at 11 o'clock. Because if I didn't do it, I would not be here right now. Well, good to see you all. Let's open in prayer. Gracious God, thank you for this day. Thank you for all of our days. May they be infused with that sense of your presence. May we have a new understanding of your grace. And as we talk about these matters, where empathy becomes the highlight, give us the guidance that we need. We pray all this in Christ's name. Amen. Well, this morning, our time together is going to be divided into 3 parts. The first is a counterpoint to the title of the book, Don't Sing Songs to a Heavy Heart. The second is to consider the strategies for entering into the space of sadness and pain, which encircles another person. And the third is an invitation to listen and reflect on a few haikus written by our friend and colleague in Stephen Ministry, Paul Day. So the sheet that you have before you is the consolidation of chapters 9 and 10. And on the reverse side are the haikus. So 3 parts, and we'll start with the counterpoint. There is room in the circle of sadness and pain for music. Amid all the music available, there's one genre that I'd like to highlight. It is the spirituals. In 1619, a small group of men, women, and children from Angola arrived in Virginia. They were a part of a larger group of West African tribal people who had been purchased by Portuguese traders, who sold them in Mexico and then to a plantation owner in Jamestown, Virginia. For over 300 years, the slave trade persisted. What is remarkable is that these women, men, boys, and girls, these dislocated, degraded, damaged, diminished people who were placed in chains and separated from family, who were ravaged by disease, physical brutality, emotional trauma, and death. These people persisted. John Mbidi is a scholar of West African culture and history, and he indicates that persistence and resilience in the slaves of Africa is attributed to the fact that they were people whose sense of themselves was intensely and intentionally communal. And Mbidi states that this identity was communicated and solidified in rituals and songs in Africa, and then here, wherever they were imprisoned and held as slaves. As anthropologists and musicologists have revealed what they discovered in the scores of tunes and songs attributed to slaves, it becomes evident that the music of their African heritage was tattooed on their hearts. As a result, the sadness, the terror, and the death they were experienced was interrupted by a familiar tune. Stories told about humming and singing that were heard as they were picking the cotton, working around the plantation, are not just one-offs. They happen to be part of the history of these African Americans who were held as slaves. Eventually, the words about Jesus, his life, his death, his resurrection, were made available to the slaves. They were able to worship. And a new genre of music began to emerge. It emerged because the words of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection were woven into these African tunes. This new genre of music traveled from plantation to plantation on the Underground Railroad and in the boats and ships that sailed the waterways of freedom. This music was played and sung in the circle of sadness and deprivation. It reminded them that they were not alone, particularly when they sang, "Over my head, I hear music in the air." They were not alone. Or when they said, "Sometimes I feel like a motherless child." The counterpoint to that was Mary had a little baby, and his name was Jesus. Point, counterpoint. While suffering marked each day, they sang, "I ain't got weary yet. I've been in the wilderness. I've been praying with Silas. I've been preaching like Paul. I've been walking with the Savior, and I ain't got weary yet." Amid the suffering, there was resistance and the quest for freedom, as is illustrated in Joshua fit the battle of Jericho, and the walls came tumbling down. Or Moses, "Go down and tell old Pharaoh, let my people go." Suffering, resistance. Then they would sing, "Wade in the water. Steal away to Jesus." Sung in a small group of fire off to the periphery of the plantation. That's where the owner said, "You can sing." Steal away to Jesus. Wade in the water. It wasn't about baptism, wade in the water. It wasn't about coming to Jesus. It was about going over to meet Jesus on the other side of the Ohio River. Wade in the water. Wade in the water, Tubman said, is the way that you prevent the dogs from getting your scent. Those songs, point and counterpoint. And then, finally, I got a robe, I got shoes, I'm going to walk all over heaven. I got a robe, I got shoes. The counterpoint is, I have no robe, I have no shoes. But their perspective had gone beyond the horizon. And then there's this one that encapsulates the hope that is found in the slaves. There is a balm in Gilead. I think it's a strange phrase for us in the 21st century. So what is Gilead? Gilead was a place of refuge. It's where David fled from his son Absalom when Absalom wanted to take over the monarchy. It's a place of comfort for the people of Judah and Israel. It's a place where medicinal potions were made available. It was a place of safety. It's got a rich history. But it's Jeremiah who says, Jeremiah, the weeping prophet, who says, the land has been devastated by the corrupt kings, and the people have been abused. Is there no balm in Gilead? Question mark. And those that came from Angola said, there is a balm in Gilead! Exclamation point. So the reason I mention this counterpoint to the title is that there is a place for music within inside of the circle of pain and devastation and terror that people experience. It's not a one-off, a little cute ditty that one sings. It's something that emerges out of the pathos of people, and they sing their song. And we've been a beneficiary of that. When our African neighbors took the question mark and just straightened it out and turned it into an exclamation point, they sent a signal of hope, reflected in another one. I shall not be moved. It's a tremendous story that is there, carried in music. And there are scores of these songs. And I invite you to get a book, go to the library, do a little research. You know, you can Google this to a fairly well, and you can get all the information you'd ever need. But the spirituals have something to say to us as we deal with this topic of the heavy heart. Well, the time comes now for us to go into the 21st century and talk about that place of song and the heavy heart. And Mother Susan comes to tell us a story about music and the heavy heart.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Good morning. Good morning. I want to introduce you to a friend of mine. She is especially able to use the circumstances of her life to give encouragement to others. And we love that. We heard Posey last week talking about the circumstances of her life and how she has used them to benefit others, to give others hope and heart. So I'm sharing with you the example of a woman whose name is Molly Grace Young. She's about 36 years old at this point. I know Molly because her dad was, you can probably finish this sentence, a student of Jack's at the College of Worcester, as so many that he has kept in touch with. But Molly Grace is very special. She, well, her parentage are singers. They're both singers. Her dad was a singer in Jack's choir. And Molly Grace trained as a singer as well at Peabody Institute of Music, which is a part of Johns Hopkins and is a very fine conservatory of music. She was set for a career as a professional singer in musical comedy. and particularly gifted at the acting and the singing, wonderful soprano voice, and cancer intervened. At the age of 29, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. This makes her in 0.02% of the population to have contracted this illness at such an early age. She's now had 6 years of treatment, actually 80 infusions of chemotherapy. Since 2017, she's been having these infusions. Her infusions are unlike anyone else's because she comes in with a suitcase full of costumes and makeup, and she spends the time of the infusion lip-syncing a musical comedy tune or a popular tune, and she has done this 80 times. And she has a YouTube channel. I wrote it out nice and big. She is the unsinkable Molly Grace. You can't miss this. You need to tune into YouTube. I'm going to put this on the wall so you can see it over by Dean. What else do I want to say about Molly? I want to show you, but she doesn't shy away from lip syncing. You forget that she's not singing, but she's in an infusion room with a curtain drawn, and you can see her in her infusion apparatus and the tubing and everything, and even the bandage on her. But she has over 900 subscribers to her YouTube channel at this point, and has helped so many people get through this ordeal of infusions. You forget she's lip syncing because it's so good. She memorizes, between sessions, she memorizes the next song she's going to do, and she doesn't shy away from things like "What doesn't kill you makes you stronger," or "Lucky Day," or "Staying Alive," of course. And the best part of waking up is barium sulfate in your cup. She wears red lipstick. And so on the days when she has a treatment, her parents both go on Facebook with red lipstick on. It looks great on her dad. They're both ministers and, as I said, singers, and they're wonderful. Molly is a cancer warrior, and she has helped a lot of people with her videos. I want to try and show you one on my iPad, and I'll just walk around. I'm so low tech, I couldn't figure out how to do this otherwise. But Molly says, "You lose so much control when you're a patient over your schedule, your body, your finances. The things you can control become very important to you." So she has gotten herself through her illness by doing this and by loving doing this. And she says the videos have helped her have the courage that she has needed. So here's Molly Grace. Watch this not work now. So, okay. All right, well this is one of her trios. No, I want to play this one for you. Okay, this is...
get mad, you should do what I do. Tell yourself how lucky you are.
Thank you, dear.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you.
Oops. Sorry, I'll turn it off. Here, I'll take that. Put it on the wall as promised. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Music to the heavy heart. In our family, we have a couple of stories, and Jane wants to share one of those.
In 2001, my dad was diagnosed at the hospital, and the doctor told us as a family that they couldn't do anything more for him. He had been ill for a while. And so my sister and I, we are the two children in the family, asked my dad where he would like to go next. And we gave him several options, and one of them was the hospice hospital in Connecticut. 9 months before that, my mother had died there. And my dad said, I want to go there, because they were so wonderful when we as a family gathered when my mom was so sick. And so my dad went to the hospice hospital overlooking Long Island Sound, beautiful, beautiful area. And on Saturday, our son Kyle and I were going to visit my dad. He had just gotten there the day before. And while we were visiting my dad, and my dad could, he opened his eyes and he could talk to us a little. And while we were visiting, a musicologist came into the room. A woman with a guitar came into the room. And she said, would you like me to play any music? I could play ethnic music. And our son, who was at Yale Divinity School at the time, said, you know what my grandfather would love? He would love hymns. And so she said, well, can you suggest to him? And so Kyle suggested, Blessed Assurance, Jesus is Mine. And I have to tell you that my dad was a tenor soloist in the choir. And so music was very, very important to him. And so she strummed along, and then Kyle and my dad sang Blessed Assurance, Jesus is Mine. And I wept. The tears came streaming down my face. But you know, it was just such a wonderful memory that I had. And to this day, when I think about it, I think of my dad, you know, at the end of his life, knowing that song by heart and really having it in his heart as well. And I just want to, as an aside, tell you about the following day. The following day, I went to visit my dad by myself, and it was a beautiful sunny day. And the nurse came in and said, "Would you like to go on the patio?" And I thought, how can we do this? My dad was bedridden. And so she said, "I'll wheel the bed out to the patio." I mean, they were wonderful. And so they wheeled my dad's bed out to the patio, overlooking Long Island Sound. And my dad was mostly asleep at that point. And I was grading, I was doing my final grades because I taught at Hamilton Wenham Middle School on Miles River. And so I was preparing my grades. My mom died at the beginning of that year. And now this was the end of the year, I had to get my grades in. So my dad was mostly asleep, but he looked over at me grading papers and he said, "You know, Jane, people don't know how hard teachers work." And you know, that was just such a sweet statement to say. You know, it just affirmed everything that I have been doing. And then he fell back asleep again. He woke up one more time and he said, "You know, Jane, the year that you and Kyle, who was visiting the day before, and the year that you and Kyle stayed with us when Dean was in Vietnam, was the happiest year of my life." And I thought, wow, what a gift. What a gift to have that memory. And the day before, to have Kyle right there with me. So I am just so really grateful for those very dear and sweet memories. I also want to mention a group of singers called the Threshold Singers that Betsy Ritalik is part of. And Betsy is, by the way, is going to be doing the presentation next week, so you want to come for that for sure. And the Threshold Singers, this is what they do, or this is who they are. In small groups of 2 to 4 singers, we sing bedside for dying patients and their loved ones. We offer our singing from the heart and free of charge upon request in private homes and nursing homes on the North Shore of Boston, including the Kaplan Family Hospice House in Danvers. Our current territory spans the Route 128 corridor from Saugus to Gloucester. Our repertoire includes songs and chants from a variety of cultures and traditions, ranging from sacred to secular. All of our singers have been through hospice orientation and are familiar and comfortable with its philosophy of care and code of confidentiality. And here is a testimony from someone who was touched by their impact. "It was so nice to see and hear all your beautiful voices. When the nurse allowed us into my dad's room, he gestured that he really appreciated the song. He can no longer speak, and smiled for the only time that day. Thank you and all the members of your dear, dear group, from me and my family, who were totally astonished by your not so random act of kindness." So music can touch the hearts of those who are hurting, and I am testimony to that.
Thoughts, response, comments, stories? I know it's a hard act to follow when you hear stories that have this power connected to them. But what a great gift that comes in very subtle, but not so subtle ways. Yeah, Jan.
I know some of you know this, but when Judd was at Mass General, we brought in our little Bose radio that also played CDs. And we played John Rutter, we played Fernando Ortega. And it was so interesting to us. These were songs that mattered to us. But people would come in, cleaning people, one of the chaplains, and they would say, can we just sit here? And they would come and sit and there was something about it that refreshed them as well. Because they were dealing with hard things, probably in their own families, but also with all those that they were attending. And one of the ones that Judd and I had listened to every night at home before he had been at Mass General was Fernando Ortega singing, Give Me Jesus. And in the morning when I rise, give me Jesus. And when I come to die, give me Jesus. So there was a reality, not a hiding behind anything.
Jan tells the story of when her husband Judd, diagnosed with terminal disease, end of life, and they're in the hospital room, and they're doing what they have always done as a couple. They have played music, and they were playing music. John Rutter, Ortega, to name it two. And as people who took care of the room came in, they listened to the music, and they asked, can we just stay? You never know what might be going on in a person's life. And I think that's what Jan references. Music is very subtle, but it's very powerful, for sure. Bruce.
In 2009, in August, my dad suddenly died. No warning, no illness. He just instantly died. And we went down to be there with my mom and everything. And then 3 months later, she entered the hospital. In a very short period of time, she was in a home stretch. They couldn't, she would only live on life support. So she asked to be taken off life support, and we flew down to spend the last 5 days of her life with her at the hospice place. And towards the end, we would just hold her hand and sing hymns and read psalms. And then finally, when my brother managed to get there, my brother Jack, she came to. She woke up, and her last words were, "I want ice cream." And then I said, "I'll go get some." She said, "Wait, vanilla." That was her very last word.
Okay. Bruce tells the story of the death of his father, and then, relatively short after, his mother is on the threshold of death. And so they go down to visit. And the last words of Mom to the sons, "I would like ice cream. I would like vanilla ice cream." The presence of people during times of absence is what we're dealing with today. All right, now we make a segue into this second part. And the second part deals with the comments that are made to the heavy heart. It's the writer in Proverbs who says, singing the songs to the heavy heart is like taking your coat off on a cold day or putting vinegar in the wound. But I think we can adjust that just a bit. It's the words spoken that don't connect with the person. So Jane's going to deal with the first 5, and I'm going to deal with the last 2.
As you see from the handout, I've got the infamous symbol. Who can tell me what this symbol stands for? Pause. Right. And that's what you really need to do when you're going to respond to a person in need. And by the way, this is a wonderful book. This is the book that we're using. And there are many people who are struggling in the world at large and in the world where we live. And the kinds of things that Ken Hawk mentions on the cover, or that are on the cover: physical disability, job loss, caregiver burnout, infertility, birth of a special needs child, miscarriage, divorce, natural disaster, trouble with the law, hospitalization, life-threatening illness, parenting struggles, death of a loved one, spiritual crisis, unwanted pregnancy, depression, empty nest, and the list goes on. Words can wound people who are suffering, and often we're not aware of the implications of our words. We use secular and spiritual platitudes and cliches innocently, unaware of the way people may process our words. Research participants were nearly universal in their negative reaction to these statements. One research participant said, "I shut down, zone out, fuzz focus, and wear a polite, cold silence." Polite silence is far from acceptable. So the first one on this list is, "I know how you feel." And I have to tell you, I was guilty of using something similar to this week. Stephen ministers try really hard. We try really hard, but we are not perfect. I was on the phone with a friend that we visited this week. And these are longtime friends of 50 years. And John has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. And it means that his wife has a heavy burden to bear. And we saw that in action as we visited with them for 3 hours. And I was just getting ready in my conversation to Barb to say, "I know it must really be hard for you." And then I thought, there's that "I know." And I thought, I use that. I use that even in cards. "I know that you're a good daughter." Well, maybe this person's not feeling they're such a good daughter at the moment. And I don't really know Barb's struggles. She's with John all day long. I only saw a 3-hour window. So I know is one of those statements that maybe is better not to say. Just drop it and just say, "It must be really hard for you to be on call 24/7. One person shared this reaction: "The statement that someone else knows how I feel is the hardest one to listen to. No one knows how I feel. You don't have to abandon empathy when you deny yourself the right to say, 'I know how you feel.' There is a difference between saying, 'I was in a similar situation that you are in now,' as opposed to, I know how you feel. So, when you're about ready to say something to someone who's hurting, pause. Next one, it's for the best. Research participants said these words or a variation of them are hurtful and not healing. Here are some other statements that have the same hurtful impact. He's at peace now. Well, you know she's in a better place. It's good he's not suffering anymore. She's with Jesus now. He's better off. It's a blessing. These statements reflect the caregiver's perspective and are better left unsaid until the hurting person arrives at that conclusion independently. So when you're about ready to say something to someone who's hurting, pause. The next one is, keep a stiff upper lip. A woman who had just suffered a miscarriage was told this, well, you already have 3 children. Miscarriage is devastating, absolutely devastating. We had a family member go through it, and it's really, really hard. Or a woman having emergency surgery and facing hospitalization. You never could tolerate pain, but it's not that bad. A man who lost his job. You can do things that you've put on the back burner of your life now. And you might think, these are really cruel statements to say, but people say them, you know, trying to bring a little positive spin in their life. Or I have a friend who's in a similar situation as yours, and he's at peace with the situation. How long should suffering last? Much longer than people think or are willing to tolerate. One person whose brother died of an overdose was told to take her time in the grieving process. A recently divorced person felt the same relief when a friend said, give yourself time to grieve. So there again, pause when you're about to respond. The next one, at least. Kenneth Houck, who has written this book, had a friend who called him after his wife died. This friend's wife had also died of ovarian cancer. Kenneth Houck asked how long they had been married, and the friend replied, 64 years. Kenneth Houck said he was thinking that at least his friend had 31 more years than he did, but he refrained from saying that. One caregiver whose father died of cancer said, I'm glad he's out of his misery now, but boy, do I miss him. Since she brought it up, you could certainly affirm her feelings. It's all right to think at least thoughts. It's not all right to say them. The next one. You should, or you shouldn't. Shoulds and shouldn'ts reveal what one person thinks another should or shouldn't do. Or they communicate how another should or shouldn't feel. Here are some examples. A person relocating and leaving hometown after 31 years. You need to look at this new adventure and that I'd love, and I know that you would love it if you gave it a chance. A few months after the death of a son, you need to get over it and get on with your life. It just sounds so, so cruel. A sibling told one woman who was going through a divorce, you ought to have left years ago. You can't let this ruin your life. It may be better for a person to change certain attitudes and take specific actions. But the point is that these words only bring more suffering and pain. And now, Dean's going to wrap up this section.
She has incredible confidence in me to do that. The last two items that are there. God doesn't give you any more than you can handle. It's God's will. Heavy-duty theology is there. Heavy-duty theology. For centuries, theologians have attempted to figure this out, and they come from a variety of perspectives. Theology is not what is needed during this time. Assessment of the argument about suffering and evil and its connectedness with a human being is not needed at this time. What is needed is the affirmation of the feeling that the person is experiencing. And when that doesn't occur, there is a loss. There is a major loss. It's always easier to come up with an thought out, theologically correct explanation. But in doing that, we distance ourselves from the person. We put something in the middle of the conversation. You now have to wrestle with this theology. Often I've wondered, what's the need level in this conversation between the two? I think the need level is more on the part of the person who wants to extend some act of kindness, but is now absolutely flummoxed by the intensity of what he or she is receiving and hearing. And the fallback default position is, well, I know this is the way it works. It's God's will. Just ask yourself, if you were on the receiving end of that, what would be going on inside of your mind and your heart and your soul? And use that as a way to come up with the words that are going to correspond and respond to that person. Clara, you had your hand up.
Well, these discussions, I think, have been absolutely wonderful, not only for John, but just plain human interaction. But there's one thing that the book or discussions have not addressed, and that is the difference. Do you think men and women differently? And I say this because a couple of weeks ago, we were out for dinner with some friends, very good friends we've known for years, and I dearly love. And
Claire is asking the question, do men and women grieve, respond differently? Talk amongst yourselves. No, go ahead. Marie, yeah, please.
I would say that every single person grieves differently.
Yeah, I think it's a false dichotomy to separate men from women that way. I think there is this sense of the individual. And what is the life experience of the person, for instance, this person that you mentioned, who the wife dies, I have a good cry, and now I'm over it. What's the life experience that has informed that response? And I think that's where the individualization shows up.
Yeah, that's very helpful.
Yeah. Kathy?
I think that when somebody says something like that, all it means is that it doesn't mean he's over it. It means that from hereafter I'm going to respond as if I were over it. You know what I mean? It's just a presentation to the world kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't, and I think it's individual to humans, not necessarily male or female. But I think maybe, not to be sexist, but men might want to portray that more than women might want to portray that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's all.
I think that's a valid point. Kathy's commenting on the responses that men make, and they are different than women, and there can be learning that's gained from that. Maureen?
I just have a sweet story that I wanted to share. Bruce, you made me think about this, and it's just, so my father-in-law spent his final days at the Kaplan House, actually probably barely 2 days. My in-laws lived in Boston, and then sadly he developed metastatic prostate cancer. It was a very big man, over 6 feet, and he became paralyzed because of the prostate cancer. Although he wanted to die at home, his wife was no longer able, even with people coming in, to care for him, and she was absolutely exhausted both in their 80s. So we kind of coaxed him and said, Dad, just to give Mom a little break, come up to the Kaplan House. We'll be very close to where we live, and we can be with you, and Mom can get some rest, and she'll stay with you in the Kaplan House. So we finally got him up, we moved in, and settled, and my poor mother-in-law was just absolutely exhausted, and I said to her, Mom, come with me, I need to take care of you, let me take you to the hairdresser, we're going to get a manicure, you're just going to rest a little, and I'm going to take you out. So we said to Dad, she wouldn't leave his side, she said, Anthony, I'm just going to go out, Audrey's going to be with me, we're holding his hand on either side of the bed, and she said, and I'm going to go to the hairdresser and blah, 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 and she said, and I want to make myself more beautiful for you, I'm going to come back more beautiful. And he looked at her, held her hand, and said, Sonny, you couldn't be more beautiful. We left, and those were his last words, and came back and he was in a coma. So I leave you with that. So our family, we always kind of say, you couldn't be more beautiful.
Thanks, Audrey. We have this one item called pink thinking. I'm not so sure what that's all about.
Okay, we just finished going over the chapter on words that hurt, not heal. And now we're going to cover pink thinking. The difference between the two chapters is the difference from being harpooned by the words, which is the chapter that we just covered, or being nibbled to death by ducks with pink thinking. Pink thinking is optimism run amok. It denies the reality of an individual's suffering and glosses over the hurting person's pain. Pink thinkers believe their role is to prod suffering individuals out of the despair and propel them to heights of hopefulness. So let's look at some ways pink thinking shows up. Cheering people up. Trying to cheer people up who are hurting makes them feel even worse. One way to cheer people up is to look on the bright side. One woman said this, "When I was in the depths of grief, there wasn't any bright side. I didn't want to hear about hope or about anything that might make me feel better because I needed to experience the feelings at the point where I was." Encouragement for me came in that I was not alone in suffering, that people all throughout Scripture felt the same kinds of feelings that I did, and that friends now were willing to sit with me in the midst of my suffering. One problem with trying to cheer people up is that you might create a yo-yo effect in their emotions. Cheering up may work for the moment while you visit, but a letdown usually follows as soon as the caregiver leaves. One research participant said, "Cheering up just slapped a bandage on my struggle." Another one is glossing over. Glossing over minimizes or trivializes suffering. When people acted like what happened to me was no big deal, I wanted to scream, "That's easy for you to say. Would you like to try to experience this for yourself?" And here are some other examples of glossing over. "You'll get over it in no time. I had the same thing. It wasn't that bad. Just trust in God. Things will get better." Denial. Sometimes the suffering person perceives the situation realistically, but others refuse to acknowledge the truth. One individual told the story about her visit with a friend who was dying from cancer. The friend was under hospice care at home, having stopped all but palliative treatment. We were just sitting there around her bed, family members and a few friends. My dying friend looked at all of us and said a little wistfully, "I'm sure going to miss you guys." Immediately, one of the group shot back, "We're still hoping for a miracle." I felt so bad because my friend's attempt to tell us goodbye was interrupted by someone who just couldn't face reality. Certainly one can always hope for a miracle, but denying the reality of that painful situation also denied the suffering person the privilege of talking about what was happening and how she felt. Tough encouragement. One research participant recounted this comment, "I can't think of a person better able to handle the suffering than you." This kind of a statement is hardly encouraging. One woman recounted this firsthand experience. She met a woman during coffee hour at church. Her sister had recently died of cancer. Her mother was in a nursing home and she was going through a divorce. She concluded by saying with a brave front, "But I'm strong. I can take it. I'll manage somehow." And I responded, "I admire your strength, but it's okay to be weak too. That's one of the reasons we have each other in the church, to bear one another's burdens. What comfort to know that there are people willing to walk alongside you." And then unbridled celebrating. Celebrating victories with a hurting person is different from forcing celebrations onto a suffering individual. One person who was suffering said, "I was unable to celebrate small or large victories while in the depths of pain and despair. It made me feel worse because I felt unaffirmed in my pain and even felt guilty for not wishing to celebrate. What we need to do is take the lead from the hurting person. One person said, "I only wanted to share the victory with those who I trusted, who would not have unrealistic expectations of more such victories." Hurting people often see themselves as broken and others as whole. Banishing pink thinking opens the door to caring for hurting people in more meaningful and genuinely comforting ways. And then at the end of that pink thinking section on your handout, I have this prayer. Lord, I want my presence to be a help, not a hindrance. Help me make it so. Help me relate to suffering people honestly, being good and true to their needs, without your watching over my tendencies to evade and avoid. I can't do it, Lord. And that prayer, as the other prayer too, was taken from Ken Houck's book.
On the back side are 5 haikus written by Paul. I'm just going to read a couple of them. And as you hear them, I invite you to enter a space that these words capture. Words move us closer to, but sometimes further from the greater silence. Scared and sacred share the same letters, and sometimes the same spaces too. Special needs. Could it be that God cares for each of us in just that way? Could it be? I leave you with those words as we go from this place to the other places that we're going to be today and be with people who are in different places. May we have the sense of God's presence wherever we walk and with whatever we say. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord's face shine upon you and give you peace.